Welcome back. There's been growing outrage in Georgia over a new voting rights bill. Just last week, a Democrat state representative was in fact arrested for trying to knock on Governor Kemp's door while he was signing the bill. Democrats have blasted the bill as racist and have said it restricts people from access to ballot boxes.
All right, here to react is Congressman Barry Loudermilk, Republican from Georgia. Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Want to go through what's actually in the bill. Here's what many say are the most controversial parts. Is a photo ID required when voting absentee by mail. It limits the use of ballot drop boxes, shortens the runoff period from 9 weeks to 4 weeks, bans volunteers from handing out food or water to voters waiting in the line. What is your reaction?
Well, I've looked over the bill and I don't see anything racist about it. This bill is not to restrict voter access but to restrict cheating in an election. And look, some of the things that people are complaining about, other states already have, that Georgia is just modeling after them. And in fact, the last point that you made, which is about volunteers handing out water, that is what everyone is talking about. But New York, Minnesota, even Delaware, President Biden's home state, already have similar provisions. This is to keep people from campaigning within 150 feet of the polling precinct. We have had that law in for a long time, and some counties in Georgia obey that law. They don't allow campaign volunteers to come in and hand out a bottle of water while wearing a MAGA hat or wearing a shirt that says "Feel the Burn" or something like that. But other counties have said, well, that's not campaigning, that's just providing water. This is clarifying that. And like I said, other states already have this in there, and nothing prohibits campaign workers from handing out bottles of water while you're in line. It's just, or not campaign, but poll workers. It doesn't prevent poll workers from doing that. Just clarifies Georgia's law that's consistent with other states. I don't see what's racist about that.
Of course, the poll workers would be seen as nonpartisan people, right, so as to not have any influence on potential voters. Wanted to ask you, though, about another critique, talking about the timing of when this law is coming out. Of course, we've seen in Georgia 2 new Democratic senators win elections there. Some critics are pointing out the timing of it all is suspect, considering the GOP majority in the legislature is taking advantage of that in order to prevent potentially an outcome similar to what we saw in January in those runoff elections. What would be your response to that criticism?
I think it's a due response to what happened in the 2020 election. I'm glad that the legislature worked as quickly as it did. This isn't about the runoff. Look, almost 750,000 Republicans didn't vote in the runoff that voted in the general election. That's why we had Democrats that won in a traditionally red state. This is about the numbers of accusations and affidavits that were filed of voting irregularities. This is about the known problems we had going into and after the previous election. This is clarifying things that that we want to make sure that our election is safe, it is secure, it is full of integrity. There are changes into this bill that were made by the legislature, which actually makes it legal, like actually having drop boxes. That was done by the Secretary of State, and according to the Constitution, he doesn't have the ability to do drop boxes. It's actually making drop boxes legal. It also makes them secure. It puts a voter ID requirement on absentee voting, not just signature match that is up to subjectivity of whoever's analyzing that signature. This is about making the vote count, making every person's vote count. And this charge of racism, it is a political statement these days. If there's something that the left doesn't like, they just arbitrarily throw out a charge of racism. And it really hurts those who are subject to true racism out there today. And this is just, it's political gamemanship of what you're hearing out of the left.
Well,
Right,
you mentioned the voter ID as well, and that's also been kind of grouped together with the idea perhaps that it could be racist. But I want to ask you about some news being reported, I believe, Washington Post, about the Biden administration considering almost a vaccine passport for those who would have received the COVID-19 vaccine. I guess the question here is, if that's a way to identify people, perhaps how could you confirm someone's identity without checking it with an ID? Is there any difference between the two here? A photo ID, again, potentially a driver's license, and then this vaccine passport as well?
Well, I mean, there are so many things that you've got to have an ID for in this nation. I mean, the most simple things that you have to prove who you are to get done. And voting not only has an impact on you, it has an impact on the entire nation, on your state, on your local community. If someone doesn't have an ID, some form of ID, now part of the criticism of the past is you require a driver's license, and some people don't have driver's license. Well, Georgia has an ID card. It's free. Anybody can go get it. You just prove who you are, and it's an identification so you can vote. It's so you can do some of these other things. Look, it is a reasonable request to ensure that the person who is voting is who they say they are and that they are a legal voter. If someone is afraid of having an ID, you got to question why these days.
Well, I think also when everything becomes racist, then nothing is racist. And to your point, there's real, honest-to-God racism that we still have to deal with in this nation. And having such silly conversations about our ID in many ways distracts from that. I want to pivot a little bit. President Biden set to unveil another massive spending package. This one on infrastructure is expected to cost as much as $4 trillion. When you look at the amount of spending that's happening right now, I mean, President Biden basically claimed that he and he alone has rescued America from the grips of COVID financially, as if somehow we hadn't already spent enough money that cost more than the war in Afghanistan and Iraq combined under President Trump, making sure that we were propping up the U.S. economy. How do you look at this new proposed spending and then couple that with all the spending that we're doing right now?
Well, there's an old adage in Washington that used to be $1 billion here and $1 billion there. Sooner or later adds up to real money. That's $1 trillion now. We throw trillions of dollars away just like it's monopoly money or something. We have to address this debt and deficit issue of spending in this nation because it is about to get to the point to where the interest on our debt will exceed our national defense budget. When you get to that point, you're in a downward spiral that is very difficult to get out. And you'll see what happened to nations like Greece and Venezuela happening here in the United States. There is an element of fiscal responsibility that we have to have that hasn't existed in a couple of decades in this nation. And we expect the American people to balance their checkbooks. You know, Congress ought to be balancing the people's checkbooks as well, because this is the people's money. It's not government money. It only comes from hardworking Americans. The taxpayer are the ones that pay every bill. And we're about to run this thing. We're already at $28 trillion. You're looking at $32 trillion. I remember back when it was $17 trillion. I ran the numbers. And if you were to put $12,000 in the bank every minute since the birth of Jesus till today, you couldn't even pay off a $17 trillion debt. That's $17,000 every 60 seconds since we started keeping the modern calendar. Look at where it is now. It's almost doubled that. We cannot sustain this rate of spending.
Well, you might have to keep the counter going, because on Fox News Sunday, Jen Psaki, the press secretary, teased that President Biden is going to unveil yet another COVID relief package. Let's listen to this.
He's going to have more to say later in April about the second part of his recovery plan, which will include a number of the pieces you talked about: healthcare, childcare, addressing that. It's a crisis right now.
So more spending, Congressman, but also I'll ask you, we didn't see Republican support at the previous spending bill. Any chance this is going to garner any GOP votes?
It should not. I mean, that's one of the issues we had with the $1.9 trillion package. One, we still have $1 trillion sitting in the bank unspent from the previous relief bills. Even left-leaning economists were saying that bill was 6.5 times larger than it needed to be. On one hand, you have Janet Yellen saying, hey, our economy is really doing well. On the other hand, saying, oh, no, we need another bailout package to make the economy go well. This is all about just spending Americans' money to buy votes. This is what it's about. They're scared to death that in the midterms there's going to be a backlash against them for their policies, what's happening at the border, building fences around the U.S. Capitol and then tearing down fences at the border. I mean, this is what we're seeing happen, and they think that they can buy off Americans by spending more money. Look, a lot of Americans, all they saw in this last package was a $1,400 check. Give me my $1,400 check. But they didn't look behind the curtain and see what was behind that 80 85% of this bill was just big government spending that's just inevitably going to strip away more of our rights, more of our liberties. And we do have to remember that with rights comes personal responsibility. And that's something that we've lost. We have to go back to the days of, look, there is some level of personal responsibility in this nation.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, American people getting less than 5 cents on the dollar. We have to make sure that we're having a conversation about what are we leaving for our children. Going to have to leave it there. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk to you soon. God bless.
Thank you. My pleasure.